All right. Well, I'm here with Scott Horton, but before we jump into that conversation, I got to tell you about the Expat Money Summit coming October 7th through 11th. So it's right around the corner. You only got a couple of weeks until the Expat Money Summit, October 7th through 11th, and it's free online. You can sign up at expatmoneysummit.com to get your free registration, your free ticket to go check it out. Is you're going to discover why international diversification is a must for those looking to preserve their liberty and wealth. Learn everything you need to know about crafting your perfect plan B, how to quickly acquire a second passport, diversify your finances offshore, invest in international real estate, and get in-depth insights on geopolitics from world-renowned experts. Headline speakers include Dr. Ron Paul, Doug Casey, yours truly, Scott Horton, sitting right here in front of me, Tom Woods, Mark Faber, and Tom Luongo. So reserve your complimentary ticket. Head over to expatmoneysummit.com. That's expatmoneysummit.com, October 7th through 11th. And I'm sure that's something you're really looking forward to. That sounds like it's going to be cool.
Yeah, very cool. I get to be up on the same list with Ron Paul and Tom Woods. I guess
Yes,
that's pretty great.
yeah, there's some great speakers there. I can't wait to check it out. I'll be going over there, checking it out as much as I can. I am working that week, but we'll be over there.
Cool. Very cool.
So you've been working on your book. There's been all kinds of stuff going on in the news since Daryl Cooper appeared on Tucker Carlson. So I figured we jump into some Ukraine and Russia and talk a little bit about World War II and how this liberal world order kind of came to be and what it's currently enraptured in at the moment.
That sounds like a lot of fun. Let's do it.
So, so Daryl Cooper comes on Tucker Carlson and he has a moment which I thought was really strange that everybody jumped on this one moment. And then I remembered a podcast I had done, I don't know, 6, 7 months ago about World War II being the new founding of the American Empire, right? So you had the American Revolutionary War in the 1700s, which founded the Republic. Then you had the Civil War, which kind of founded a new democracy almost. And then you had World War II that founded the empire. And so I was thinking about it from that angle. And so shitting on Winston Churchill, which I don't even know if he was really shitting on him per se. It's come across to me that he was just trying to point out that he's not like what everybody makes him out to be, right? So you have all these mythological kind of ideals about the founders of the nation, right? Whether it's George Washington or Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, even Abraham Lincoln, there's like this, all these myths that go around these people. And so I kind of feel like he was just trying to crack the veneer of this myth around Winston Churchill. And
Yeah.
I mean, he had even made the point that he said that he thought he's like, this is probably hyperbole, you know? So he even set himself up to be like, yeah, I'm not like being literal here whenever I'm saying that he's like the chief villain.
Right. He was trying to be provocative in the first place. And of course,
Right.
everyone who went and cried about it ignored that he had said that in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah, I heard somebody played a clip of it today, and they didn't even play that part of it. They
Yeah.
cut that part off, and they played
Yeah.
everything after that.
Well, so
Is
there's a few different things here. I mean, first of all, I completely agree with you about FDR and Truman being the founding fathers. And isn't it interesting that the British Prime Minister is one of the founding fathers of the American Empire as well? So it really is just straight out of Cecil Rhodes' Confession of Faith, where he says, he curses the founders for declaring independence from the British Empire and says, the most important goal is to reunite America and Britain to then rule the world. And so that part of it just goes unquestioned, that America's reunited with Britain now, and that's the way it's supposed to be. And together we are the dominant force in Europe. And a big
Mm.
part of that, of course, is because of the morality play of the Second World War. And for anyone who knows anything about it, there's no question that the Japanese imperialists and the German Nazis were unmitigated evil. They were the state in its ultimate totalitarian form at war.
Yeah.
And they were just monsters. They're just as absolutely as bad as humans can be. It's also the same is true for Joe Stalin and the Soviet Union, who was one of America's allies in that war. And it's really also true for the British. And they weren't quite as bad as the Germans or the Japanese in that particular war. But then again, I don't know the exact years off the top of my head, but Churchill starved 1 million Bangladeshis to steal all their resources for the use of the empire and this kind of thing. So if you were on the receiving end of the British Empire, it was a nightmare for many people. But, you know, I saw this guy. He said, it was years ago. I can't remember the context exactly, but it was a video. I think maybe it was an article. I don't know, whatever. Anyway, some guy was communicating about how he was trying to explain to his son the world wars and how the Second World War is easy. America fought for good, for democracy and peace and the liberal world order against the forces of unmitigated darkness.
Mm.
They're the bad guys, we're the good guys, and we kicked their ass is what happened in World War II. But in World War I, it's a lot harder to explain. Well, see, there was the Kaiser, right? And the Turks, they had this empire called the Ottoman Empire. And there's this place called the Balkans, where over there in Sarajevo, things get complicated, right? The morality tale kind of falls apart because it's the Russian Empire versus the Austro-Hungarian Empire versus the British and the French and, you know, with the Ottomans thrown in or whatever, the Central Powers and the Allied powers. Everybody's just an empire jockeying for an advantage, and they're all evil. So what the hell? How do you tell the story? It's just some stuff that happened, right?
Yeah.
Whereas World War II is so simple. But it also becomes a case then that if you want to make World War II complicated at all, then first of all, liars and just people of bad faith are going to spin that, oh, you love Hitler so much. Just like, yeah, and we all love Koresh and we all love Noriega and we all love Hussein. Oh, let me tell you how much I love Saddam Hussein, Tommy, just because all the accusations against him were false, you know? And they always do that. On the other hand, though, just like with Saddam Hussein, there are people of good faith who believe lies, or at least are kind of simple-minded and think that way, who you would want to give a chance to, right? Who you would want to give you a chance if you were going to say something coloring outside of the lines. They're like, look, man, I'm not saying I'm a Hitler lover. I'm just saying I'm not a Churchill lover. Can you bear with me for a paragraph or two and see if they can handle it emotionally, right? That like, look, man, it's okay to talk about this. And I'll give you a perfect example of that. Pat Buchanan wrote a book called Churchill, Hitler, and the Unnecessary War. Now that quote, the unnecessary war is in quotes on the cover because Churchill said that. He was the one who called it an unnecessary war after it was all over. He said, oh, oops, I guess we shouldn't have done that. It looks like we stuck the wrong pig, he said. Well, what is he talking about? What he's talking about is that Hitler was facing east. He divided Poland with the communists, but now he shared a border with the communists. And he was suing for peace. He wanted peace with the British Empire. He didn't want to fight them. If he was going to get into a fight, he was going to go east. What Churchill did was essentially force him to attack and destroy all the Western democracies first. If you're going to take on the Soviets, you're going to have to get rid of the French and, you know, your entire Western flank is going to have to be neutralized, right? The British kicked off the continent. Only then can you fight Stalin. Well, and then he fought Stalin anyway. So what was the good of that? And now the Holocaust happened in the lands between Germany and Britain. But they didn't have anywhere to run to. Why not? because the Nazis had already conquered all the Western democracies. Maybe they could have fled to France. Maybe they could have fled to Denmark or to Belgium, but all of that had to go first. And so when Pat wrote his book, Pat knew that everyone was going to say, oh, how come you love Hitler so much? So you know what he did? He cited only British historians, only English historians from the top of Oxford and Cambridge, and said, look, this is what happened, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when you read Buchanan, then you can see that Churchill was just George W. Bush.
Mm-hmm.
Churchill was just the guy that was in charge at the time, and nothing special or wise about him. And if you want to, attack him, as Cooper said in that interview, he was drunk most of the time. He was kind of a scummy guy. People always give him credit for having like all these quips. But why was he always having to come up with these quips? Because people were always correctly accusing him of being a bum, and so he was always having to defend himself. But
I
just
saw a
on the,
guy. I was
and
just going to say something funny was I saw a guy defending Churchill as far as being a drunk all the time. He said, look, we all know he drank a lot, but he was only drunk once during World War II.
Oh, okay, I'm sure. So Dave Smith went on Piers Morgan, and they put him up against an English historian, whoever that guy was.
Roberts, yeah.
And that guy, all he could do is tilt at a straw man. He goes, one wonders whether Cooper even knows that it wasn't Churchill who gave the war guarantee to Poland. It was Chamberlain. Well, since they didn't discuss that on the show, and Cooper never said anything indicating that he misunderstood the facts of who gave war guarantees to who, this guy is just tilting at windmills, right? He's just essentially smearing a guy, accusing him of not knowing something when there's no evidence, no reason for him to assume that whatsoever. Of course, everyone who knows the story knows that what happened was after Chamberlain was embarrassed when Hitler took the rest of Czechoslovakia, he, in his fit, right, in his anger, he gave a war guarantee to Poland and said, if you get into a war with Germany, we got your back. When all he was doing was outsourcing a declaration of war to a bunch of fascist Polish colonels who were not much less Nazi than Hitler himself at the time. And two, to a country that they had no ability to defend whatsoever. If they can't defend France, they sure as hell can't defend Poland. And then what happened at the end of the war? The Poles went to the Soviet communists anyway. They were all enslaved and lost anyway. And so if Cooper had been there, or if David remember this part of the story off the top of his head, it might have been an important point to say that, look, yes, everyone knows that Chamberlain is the one who gave the war guarantee. Anybody who's read Buchanan knows that his foreign secretary, Lord Grey, said that he should have been thrown in an insane asylum for it. That was the stupidest goddamn thing he had ever heard in his entire life. Are you kidding me? You gave them a war guarantee. Why? Because you're embarrassed over Czechoslovakia? Get a hold of yourself. That was what, so you could just as easily say that was Chamberlain's big blunder. What's the frame now, Tommy, that Chamberlain and, I guess, in alliance with FDR should have just declared war on Germany in 1938. Or maybe in 1933. And just like that was the lesson of World War II, is everybody waited too long. But did Britain have the ability to keep the Germans out of Czechoslovakia? Of course not. How are they going to give a war guarantee to Czechoslovakia? And, and of course, what's funny is, isn't it funny too? This narrative, the foundation of the American empire, is also based on the narrative of Chamberlain's failure at Munich, and how you can never, never, never compromise with your adversaries ever, because all adversaries are Hitler, and all compromise is appeasement, and appeasement never works when your enemy is always Hitler. And yet at the same time, they teach us all in seventh grade. Well, in the 1980s, they did teach in seventh grade that the Versailles Treaty and the punitive terms of the treaty that ended the First World War, written up by the British and the French, were what caused the rise of the Nazi Reich and the will of the German people to, first of all, take back their territories that had been stripped away, and secondly, to take revenge on their enemies, and particularly the communists. But there are a lot of hard feelings there with the countries in the West as well, with Britain and France as well. And everybody knows that that was what happened, that it completely destabilized the country. They kept this terrible blockade on them and starved millions of them after the war was over. They starved the people of Germany, stripped all their territories away. And that was why Hitler began every speech denouncing the traitors of 1918, the Democrats. And you got to love this. Woodrow Wilson said, oh, well, I'm not going to sign any treaty with any damn dirty German militarists. So I insist that they all step down from power, let the German Democrats who didn't do the war, make them sign the treaty. So then they were completely discredited as the ones who had sold Germany out, when it was the generals who gotten them into the war and lost it. But because of Woodrow Wilson, he completely discredited them. And Hitler began every speech denouncing the traitors of 1918 who sold us out to the enemy. And that was and everybody knows that was the punitive, because of American entry into World War I. Britain and France were able to put these punitive measures on Germany that ended up leading to the rise of the Reich. But then they say, oh, but listen, hey, once the consequences of your policies come blowing back, Tommy, then you have to just kill you for yourself. And that's the founding lesson of World War II. And then one more thing before I shut up about Cooper, because this is what got him really in trouble, was people took him out of context about the Holocaust. His first statement was, yeah, man, I'm saying here that Churchill really bears a lot of the responsibility. Otherwise, it just would have been an invasion of Poland. And he didn't say this, but maybe a war between Germany and the Soviet Union. But what turned it into the worst thing that ever happened ever was that Churchill would just not let the war end, right? But then he says, hey, not like I'm apologizing for Hitler here, because after all, what the Germans did was terrible. So the part that they're quoting is not him making excuses for the Germans. He's literally in the middle of accusing them too. He goes, yeah, Churchill sucks, but also the Germans suck. For example, they invaded the East with no plan to care for all of the prisoners of war that they took, millions and millions of people. And that is not a revisionist take, right? Like he did not say there was no Holocaust and that no one was shot and no one was gassed and no one was murdered deliberately. He didn't say that. He said from the very beginning, they had no way to feed them. And from the very beginning, German officers were cabling back to Berlin saying, maybe we should just massacre them all. Might that be a better way to handle it? That was how it started. Because, and this is something that, and I have not done a lot of work on World War II in many, many years. This is not my specialty, but I know that the Jewish population of Germany was quite small. It was like 3%. So you could say the Holocaust had already started. They were, 30 or 50,000 Jews had already been put in concentration camps and stuff like that in Germany. But once they invaded Poland, there were millions of them. This is the Pale of Settlement, right? There's Ashkenazi Jews everywhere. And then same thing when they get to Ukraine and whatever. I don't know all the different populations and all the different countries there in Central Europe. But now what are you going to do with them all? And the answer was, I don't know. And who cares? Right. So Cooper was accusing. And now what happened was he got off on a tangent. And he says the same thing with the Israelis and the Palestinians. People say, well, it's not our fault it's not the Israelis' fault about the Palestinians. Well, look, you're the one going to war against them. You're responsible for the civilians who are caught in the middle.
Right.
And then they went off from there and they weren't able to go back to the Holocaust. And maybe Tucker, and look, it's hard to do interviews. I screw up all the time. Sometimes I'm not even listening. I don't know. It would have been better if Tucker had said, well, now hold on a second there. You brought up the Holocaust a minute ago. Let's go back and talk all about that and find out exactly what you have to say about that. Because he ended up with this statement that sounded out of context, and especially for dishonest people trying to make something out of it. It sounded like he was minimizing it. And he was saying, oh, well, they were just POWs that didn't get fed, which is not what he was saying. And in fact, see, my thing is, he's a friend of mine. I know this guy, and I've listened to his previous work. And if you've listened to his great series, Fear and Loathing in the New Jerusalem, then you know that he does talk about the Holocaust in there. And in fact, he reads at length eyewitness statement from a young woman who survived the massacre at Babin Yar in Kiev. And then he reads the story of a guy who somehow got his father out of the camp, and his father went back to the camp because he said, I can't compete for this grain, for this crumb of bread with you every day. I'd rather die than take your bread, son. And he's, reading all this stuff. And you can hear his voice crack as he's reading this Jew tell the story of his father's death at the hands of these Nazi monsters. And like, dude, that's over at the Daily Beast and over at CNN and MSNBC and whatever. They don't give a damn to falsely smear a guy as a Holocaust denier. They don't give a damn what he really thinks or what he really said or whatever. If they can make a 2 minutes hate out of Martyr Made and use him against against Tucker Carlson, then they'll try to do that, But the problem is with this new world that we're living in is that Daryl Cooper's now the #1 podcast in America ahead of Tucker Carlson.
Yeah.
So they just put millions of ears on Fear and Loathing. And you know how Fear and Loathing, I'll go ahead and ruin it for you. People put your fingers in your ears if you haven't heard Fear and Loathing in the New Jerusalem or if you don't want it spoiled. But I think it's important for the discussion here. Fear and Loathing in the New Jerusalem begins with him telling the story of what it's like to be on the receiving end of a violent ethnic cleansing campaign. Rapes and murders and tortures and your neighbors being killed and arson fires and your wife raped in front of you and then a gun to your head and blow your goddamn brains out. That's how it starts. And you don't know who he's talking about. It sounds like maybe he's talking about what it's like to be a Palestinian suffering at the hands of the Israeli occupation. But he's not. He's talking about Jews suffering pogroms in Russia in the early 20th century. And how this is the creation, this radicalization of this generation of young communists and Zionists in Eastern Europe, this revolutionary generation that created the Soviet Union and created Israel in Palestine. And you can tell his sympathy is with everyone. His sympathy is with all civilians, right? He's not a libertarian, he's a conservative, but essentially he has more or less our same frame of reference, which is the white hats are the people and the black hats are the governments and power factions and terrorist groups, right? Any armed group of men, they're the bad guys and virtually always, and the innocent civilians caught in between them are the victims, if not the heroes. And that's the way he portrays everything. And anyone who could listen to that and think for a minute that this guy is some kind of Nazi or some kind of Holocaust denier is just completely ridiculous. And just think about, like, what would it take for you to go off and try to destroy a man? Make sure he never works again. When you don't even know, you don't even take the time to find out what he's really saying and in what context. Oh, when he blasphemed Churchill. Well, what exactly did he say? Did he go past what A.J.P. Taylor wrote in The Origins of the Second World War? Or what anyone could find in Nicholson Baker's book, Human Smoke? Or in Pat Buchanan's Churchill? I've interviewed Pat Buchanan about that book. Pat Buchanan doesn't love Germany or Hitler. Pat Buchanan's Irish. The hell does he care about taking Germany's side? He doesn't. That's not the point. The point is, hey, why base our beliefs on facts that are not true? Right?
Yeah.
Why live in a world, as you say, why live in an empire founded on lies? When we could have our George Washington's republic back, if that was what we wanted.
Right.
That was what we believed in.
Yeah. Well, you touched on something a couple of times, and I just kind of want to get get your perspective on this because it's something I think we see constantly around us, especially online culture. Like when I'm not on Twitter near as much as I used to be. I know you're off Twitter now, right?
Yeah,
But
totally.
but you're very familiar with these people that claim to be communists, and many of them are, you know, in college and being brainwashed by universities and professors and etc. But one of the first, if you challenge them, one of the first things they ever do is they attack you and they call you a fascist immediately. They don't stop and say, well, what is it that you actually believe? It's, if you're not a communist, you're a fascist. And that seems like very, like, not even just popular, but it seems like it's necessary for their point of view. And then if you're a fascist, you're automatically an anti-Semite.
Yeah.
And
You
I
know what,
wonder,
though? Like from a libertarian point of view, that's right. You know, I argue with an anarcho-syndicalist on my first radio show back in 1998. There was this commie, like Earth First type, um, Copperhead. That was his name. Was it Adam, I think? And I go, come on, man, just admit it. The socialism with a police force is communism. And he goes, okay, fine, but capitalism with a police force is fascism. And then I go, all right, then. Yeah, touche, dude. And that's why Rothbard was an anarcho-capitalist, right? Is because, like, yeah, that's really right, dude. From each according to his own security needs, right? Like, what is this? Even just having a sheriff's department is Bolshevism to me, or fascism to me. And like, have you ever heard of a big businessman that didn't want Congress to regulate his competition and give him a giant welfare handout? You know what I mean? So, like,
mhm.
Robert Hicks calls our current system a participatory fascism, which, by the way, not that everybody who's not a communist is a supporter of our current system, but I'm just saying we got a big government. We got, as they taught me again back to 7th grade, we have a quasi free market, a mixed economy ever since FDR saved the day in the
Yeah,
30s, you
right.
know?
Yeah.
And so, you know, there is truth to that. Although typically when people use the F word, like, it does mean, like the argument ad absurdum, everything within the state and nothing outside it in Mussolini's way or in, you know, a
Hmm.
Hitlerian way. And there is such a thing somewhere on that scale of a limited republic and a hopefully not too mixed economy and free markets, you know. I
Well,
mean, after all,
I've often said,
fascism was avowedly anti-capitalist,
yeah.
you know.
Well, I've often said that progressivism is that place on the Venn diagram where communism and fascism overlap.
That's a good way to put it. And then
But
which libertarians in a tough spot, right? When it's Stalin on the left and Hitler on the right, and we're trying to go, no, 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 everybody, it's all wrong, you know.
it is. That's why you try to stay on the bottom half of the spectrum.
Yeah, somewhere out in third dimensional space, you know.
So, but my question was like, so the communist, the ideology of communism, which you brought up earlier, was created by Jewish individuals. That they also created Zionism. Now, I don't know what the overlap of Zionism and communism may be. I haven't really ever looked at that. Just probably out of pure laziness. But communism has always been said that it only works on a global scale, right? It can only work properly if it was instilled globally, that you couldn't have it in segments. And if you do have it in segments, then you get all the death and disorder that we've seen in the Soviet Union and Mao's China, etc. So I'm just curious, like, how much of the Nazi regime started off fighting an ideology and then turned into um, a racial or identity kind of war. You know what I'm saying? Like, did it start off that they were fighting ideology and then it just
Well,
kind of like evolved into
I
what
think
it
you
became?
really need better experts on those questions of like the origin of the party ideology and all that. Like, I know it's a mess. It's,
Uh,
look, something that they always do leave out of the story. Again, just because, to be realistic about it at all, it makes it sound like, oh, you're apologizing for the bad guys or whatever. But, you know, it's just like with Osama bin Laden. The question is not like, what is this guy's problem? The question is, why would anybody listen to him and do what he says?
right.
Right. So, like, okay, Hitler is just the most fanatical madman ever. So how could a country give him that job of being in charge of them and letting him boss them around and take them to war and all these things? A huge part of it was commies in the East. I mean, we got an ocean in our East.
Mm,
East to them is, was Poland and Ukraine.
yeah.
And, the Holodomor happened in the 1930s, like right as Hitler is coming to power in Germany, is right when the communists are starving 5 million people to death in Ukraine and Kazakhstan and in Russia too. Um, and so, the stories coming out of there, all of the rumors of the darkness of what's happening in the East, the true stories of what was coming out of the East, certainly radicalized people. And then you had communist movements in Germany, and the Nazis were the ones who met them on the street, right? Like there'd be a giant street fight. Who's out there? It's the Nazis versus the commies. And so that was, it's just like we saw with like Black Lives Matter riots and commie left wing arson and agitation here. People moved to the right in reaction against it.
Mm,
And so wouldn't you rather have these kooks than those kooks? That's the argument. Just like, wouldn't you rather have Paul Wolfowitz than Osama bin Laden? Don't you need
yeah.
these kooks to protect you from those kooks? And that's the way the argument goes. And
Right.
so, I think that was a big part of why people tolerated the rise of the Nazis and how they then, conflated all of their Aryan mythology and racialism and anti-Slavic, anti-Jewish, this and that. Like, who knows? I never read Mein Kampf. I who cares? I did read The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich, or actually not true. I read like half of it, and I got distracted. I never did finish it. But Shearer describes Hitler as like the most fanatical guy who ever lived. Like no CEO ever got up as early in the morning and as dedicated to his job as this freak of nature, right?
Mm,
He was just absolutely determined, just ruthlessly, unstoppably determined to get a hold of that power to use against his enemies in a way that's like, I don't know of any American politician who is that mad of a madman. You know what I mean? Like he was as determined as any has ever been about anything. I think probably people are just making up what they need to say to get his favor. Is probably the most because he is the leader. Uber alles.
so the world, the end of World War II kind of created this liberal world order where kind of it created this vacuum because it destroyed all the superpowers throughout Europe, whether it was in the East or Western Europe. And America kind of stepped into the void and became the lone superpower after that, and kind of went on this devastating run of just war after war after war. It's like they almost like they just picked up the baton after the British dropped it and just continued the same policies and
Yeah.
the same kind of tyrannical colonialism throughout the world. And it's led us all to this Ukraine Russia um, kind of it's just a disaster. I don't know how else to say it. It's just devastating. And now we're in a position to where the United States is giving like what is it F-15s or F-35s over to
16.
Ukraine,
Yeah.
F-16s over to Ukraine, and they're using them to um, go into Russia and actually invade their invaders, and it's just this big mess. What's been going on with that war?
Well, it's from almost the beginning, it's been the irresistible force versus the immovable object. I think the Russians, very lately, they're making a lot of gains. The Ukrainians, and this was pretty obvious at the time, that they were making a major mistake by invading Kursk. The idea
Hmm.
was, and they've said this, that they would force the Russians to divert forces out of the Donbass to go and defend inside Russia. But Putin's argument I guess, I think in his own mind, is that no, these four provinces are Russia. And so fighting for Kursk isn't really any different than fighting for the Donbass. And
Mm.
so he's not diverting forces from the Donbass. What's happened is the Ukrainians diverted their defensive forces from the Donbass to go and invade Russia with. And now the Russians are taking town after town. In fact, um, they rolled into this one town and all the defensive fortifications were empty. They just rolled right into the town. And then there's a bigger city called Provosk, which is, and I never pronounce these words right, so, but I don't care either. But this is an important transportation hub, trains and highways and stuff. So once the Ukrainians lose that, which would be any day now, that is going to really cost their ability to access southern Donetsk. And so looks like momentum is with the Russians there, but you know, it's at the very best for the Russians side, they will have a Pyrrhic victory here. And the costs for their side have just been absolutely enormous. Certainly more than 100,000 killed and hundreds of thousands wounded. Same for the Ukrainians. And they've really kind of screwed themselves because before, and yes, America had to cheat. This is why America had to cheat. Russian leaning candidates usually won when they had a presidential election in Ukraine. Now, Russia, in the name of protecting them, is forcibly removing the entire Russian leaning population of the country and making them Russians again, which leaves him with an enemy rump state there in Kiev, which, and especially after all this bloody fighting and everything, they're going to have a horrible relationship going forward here for the indefinite future. And particularly if the rump of what's left of Ukraine after this ends up joining NATO anyway. And Putin just defined his goals in a way that maybe diplomatically makes sense, but militarily it seemed like a real mistake. And you know, look, I'm just being an analyst here. I sure as hell am not on their side. I'm just talking about the predicament that Putin put his country in. Is they didn't take the capital city. And they didn't succeed in smashing the military. He did not send in heavy bombers, even at the risk of losing a few, to decimate the crap out of their military bases in the initial invasion and their military forces. And so he's got a government in Kiev that's backed by the West and all our money machines and all of our military machines, artillery shells and tanks and all kinds of guns and missile launchers and the rest of this. And it has not and will not help Ukraine win the war, but it's helped it last until we're recording this thing on September 11th, 24. It was 2 years ago. This weekend, it was 2 years ago that Ukraine launched their big offensive and took all of Kharkiv back and forced the Russians into Luhansk, and then also made a gain and took back half of Kherson in the south. And that was really their best shot then.
I wonder how much of that was kind of delusional on Putin's part because of what happened with Crimea, right? So they just kind of walked into Crimea and it was just kind of like, this is ours
right.
now.
And from the beginning, right? In 2014 as well. He thought, yeah, we'll just kind of, this would be easy. But then no, it was not, you know? And because Crimea was so easy, that also was the reason why Kiev absolutely refused to let the East go. We just lost Crimea. We're not losing the Donbass. So they immediately called in the airstrikes, right? They immediately declared war on the people of the East when they were just, you know, voting on autonomy and, you know, strong federalism. Essentially, we're not even threatening to secede. And they just went right to war with them. And we know it was John Brennan came to town and told them to do it. The CIA director came and said, you're going to go to war and we're going to back you in it. And it was before Poroshenko even took power. It was Cherkovsky, I guess, or Chernovsky, whatever you say, the interim president that started it. And that was in, you know, April 2014.
Right. And then they had the civil war break out in the Donbass shortly after that. And in 2015, it looked like Putin started like figuring out like that the United States was involved in Maidan and the Snow Revolution of 2011. So in 2015 is when he kicked all the American NGOs out of Russia, including USAID. Now, what's his name? I can't think of his name right now off the top of my head, but that professor that the U.S. has
McFall.
sanctioned. I'm sorry.
McFall.
No, no, no. The Russian professor
Oh,
um, that that they call Putin's brain. I'm blanking on his
oh,
name right now.
Dugan.
Dugan.
Yeah.
There you go. Thank you. He actually accused Putin of showing cowardice in 2015
Yeah.
because he said that he should have invaded Ukraine in 2015 when they took Crimea and they kicked out all the NGOs. And
Yeah.
but Putin didn't want to do that. And it was kind of obvious. We hear all the time that Israel tries not to kill Palestinian citizens, and they're only after Hamas, but Hamas is using them as human shields, blah blah blah. And but it really appeared to me, it appeared obvious to me that Putin really was trying to avoid civilian casualties when launching the war against Ukraine. And it didn't seem to me like he really pulled out the big guns until Ukraine began to invade back into Russia. And that's when he started bombing like water supplies and,
Yeah.
power, power
Once they
centers
hit the
and
Kursk bridge and started hitting in Crimea and
right.
hitting inside Belgorod and all that. Yeah.
Yeah, but it really
That's
appeared
true.
like he was trying to keep from killing the civilians of
And the
Ukraine.
Hawks always say that, like, well, we keep escalating and he keeps not doing anything about it. But that's not true. Like, they're just waiting for atom bombs to go off, and anything short of atom bombs doesn't count as an escalation. But you just got it exactly right. He didn't call out the big guns until they started hitting inside Russia. Then he was like,
Hmm.
all right, well, I guess I'll just blow up your waterworks and your electricity and attack all
Yeah.
these civilian targets now,
Hmm.
infrastructure targets mostly,
Right.
to punish them, which is, of course, war crimes is horrible to do, collective punishment. But, and I mean, look at what we're talking about with this steady loss of these cities in the East. Like, oh, you're taking this principled stand. We're not going to back down to that, Putin. Well, you keep losing more and more and more and more territory. The rate they're going, they're going to lose their whole army that's inside Russia now,
Hmm.
which, they bit off a chunk they can't hold. And then eventually, it's quite possible, maybe even likely, they're going to lose Kharkiv and maybe even Odessa. They could have called this war off a long time ago.
Yeah.
And they're just going to end up making things so much worse for themselves. And if they lose Odessa, that means essentially they lose the whole southern coast, all the way to Transnistria there. And then Ukraine loses all their ports, all their access to the Black Sea.
Hmm.
And all you had to do was just sign a deal that promised them to be neutral and not join NATO. You know,
Yeah.
it's to be America's friend is fatal, as Henry Kissinger said. Ask the Hmong tribesmen whether we got your back or not.
The Kurds.
Yeah.
We care about them every once in a while.
Yeah. And betray them every
Yeah.
once in a while too.
Yeah.
Over and
We
over
care
again.
about them when it benefits us, and then we just leave them hanging out to dry.
Yep.
So,
It is. It's really bad. And the war itself is, tank rounds and artillery shells, drones dropping hand grenades. So in other words, it's dudes just getting blown to pieces, man. Legs
mm,
blown off, guts blown out,
yeah.
hands and feet blown off, and just the worst kind of injuries and deaths out there. People bleeding out in the field because there's no transport. All their money's getting embezzled. Billions of dollars of money that's supposed to be going to the guys out in the field, getting embezzled by the politicians back in Kiev. It's ugly as hell, dude. It's just terrible. And it's perfectly fitting for Joe Biden and his policy, where he's just out of his damn mind. And none of his facts are right. Everything he says is some stupid analogy. He's FDR, taking on Hitler, of course. And just Putin has sworn he's going to conquer all of Europe if I don't stop him. Like, no, dude, he hasn't even sworn to take Kiev. He
Mm,
has sworn to take the Donbass and the Azov coast. right?
Right.
Luhansk, Donetsk, Zaporozhye, and Kherson. That's what he's vowed to take. And the thing is, Joe Biden's not lying. He just doesn't know what in the hell he's talking about. He's gone completely nuts. He just believes things, his own propaganda lines and whatever. I don't
Yeah.
even know who's in charge. Maybe Jake Sullivan, but the
I
chief of
I
staff.
I wouldn't be surprised if it's more like a board of directors type of situation, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, you
Yeah.
got
So,
Jake
well,
Sullivan, you
Sullivan's
have
the national
Obama.
security advisor. So
Yeah.
you would think he's like chairing the thing. But see, he's not in the chain of command, dude. He doesn't have any real authority over the Department of Defense or state at all. He's the boss of the NSC, but they don't really have power to act.
Well, who was the okay,
I
so
really don't
when
know who's running shit up there. Bob Woodward should have had a book that came out 6 months ago that tells us what's going on inside the Biden administration, and we just haven't had that. We haven't had anything like that.
hmm,
You know?
what's
And
been
which words, I know those are always fanciful, but they're at least some kind of window into the inner workings because he gets interviews with the principals. You know what I mean? With
right,
the highest
right.
level people.
Who was the head of the DIA in Ukraine when Trump was being impeached for the phone call that came out and said, well, the problem was we already had a Ukrainian policy and the president tried to come in and change it. Do you remember who that was?
Yeah, that's Vindman. Yeah, he's a
Vindman.
lieutenant colonel. He was the so-called whistleblower, really. He was the one who gave the stuff to Eric Ciaramella, who then, passed it on to the Senate and everything.
The
It was
name that shall not be
Alexander
spoken.
Vindman and his twin brother were both on the who he goes by the twin brother is I think they call him Eugene or something like that. Anyway, um yeah, so he was a major part of the Ukraine gate impeachment, and he wrote about this in the Atlantic, and you can read it also in his testimony before the Congress. Where he just goes off, dude, in no uncertain terms, Tommy. It's just so clear. Like this is not very rough paraphrasing here. That like, look, the president was trying to change America's Russia and Ukraine policy. And who the hell does he think he is to do that? He has
Hmm.
no right to do that. Me and my friends in the interagency, says the lowly lieutenant colonel, who's less than a colonel, who's less than a 2-star general or even a 1-star general, right? This nobody, this foreign born Ukrainian national, lieutenant colonel says, we have a policy. Me and my friends, we have a Ukraine policy. And I'll be damned if I'm going to let the elected president of the United States change it. He has no right to.
Right.
And I will stop him.
Yeah, I
And why did
remember.
I do this? Because. And that's it.
Yeah, I remember when that came out and during the testimony, and I was like, we just gave away the whole game.
Yeah. It's incredible to read it. And he wrote an essay like this for the Atlantic too, where he's just like, look, man, let me explain. And then he says things like, well, what Trump did is he clearly crossed a bright legal line, but he doesn't describe what legal line that is. It's not. And then he does go on to describe that how much he disagrees with the foreign policy decision
Hmm.
being made here. Right. And that's it.
Yeah.
There's absolutely nothing, illegal. You could say, I would argue, Trump's phone call to Zelensky there or with Zelensky was not a perfect phone call. It was kind of ugly for the president when he knows that Joe Biden is the front runner against him to say to the Ukrainians, geez, whatever happened to that criminal investigation and this guy's son or his business and the thing that happened over there.
Hmm.
On the other hand, he was guilty, and the company he was working for was totally criminal. And he got the job just so that he would have Biden juice to prevent the new Kiev regime from cracking down and prosecuting him. And when they tried to anyway, Biden got the guy fired. And their only excuse for it was, get this, Tommy, Biden is so anti-corruption that he fired this guy for not prosecuting his son's company. Ugh. And so what Trump was asking them to do was not prosecute Hunter Biden. There was no charge. There was no indictment against Hunter. That wasn't it. The scandal was that this company was in trouble for all kinds of bribery and fraud and crimes, and that all of that got shut down because the boy got a job. So did Cofer Black, the former head of counterterrorism, and so did what's his name, the former president of Poland, got a seat on there as well. This was all buying influence to protect the company, and Taibbi explains this well. Zelensky, however you pronounce his name, that was the owner of Burisma. He had been tight with Yanukovych, the previous president.
Right.
So now that America overthrew the government, he's like, uh-oh, and was trying to suck up to the new guys, basically. And, passing money around.
Right.
So it was not really, well, okay. It was like a little bit unseemly, but not altogether improper for Trump to say whatever happened with that. And at no point does he say, listen, pal, you're not getting the missiles if you don't get me my indictment. He doesn't say that.
Right.
And he says, oh, you like missiles, huh? Or whatever. But he says that no matter what Zelensky says, he goes, oh, yeah, that Burisma thing sounds bad to me. So he goes,
well, and this was when this after the video surfaced of Biden at the Council of Foreign Relations.
Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
that's
And
what I thought.
it was after the FBI. Look, all this trouble went down in the end of 19, and he was impeached in January of 2020, or was it February? At the beginning of 2020. Dude, the FBI knew about the laptop. First of all, Hunter had been indicted secretly by the IRS in 2018, and they kept it secret. They didn't let anyone know. And then, or was it the IRS one that was secret? I think it was. And then they got their hands. They knew the laptop was legit in November of 19, and they got their hands on it in December of 19. The FBI did. Now, these are the guys that leaked 1,000 leaks against Trump. Thousands of leaks against Trump. But at no point in the middle of his impeachment, the impeachment of the President of the United States for the third time in American history, at no point do they leak that actually we have this laptop that shows that Hunter Biden was in all this corruption and influence peddling in China as well as Ukraine and all of these things, right? And then when in October of 20, when Rudy Giuliani debuted the laptop, nobody leaked that, yes, we know it's legit. They put out this fake story that it was Russian disinformation. All the media went with that. Facebook and Twitter completely crushed the New York Post stories about it. They knew they were lying. They had had that laptop in their hands for 9 months by that time. So the level of, okay, like during Russiagate, you might think, man, the FBI just sure can't handle their leak problem very well. 1,001 leaks coming out of the FBI every day.
Yeah.
But then, boy, when they don't want to leak,
Yep.
when a leak would prove the president's right and the guy that they want out, and the president, it's not like they're going after some senator they don't like even. They're going after the president of the United States. The degree of thumb on the scale, being used by the FBI and the Justice Department against Trump is just legendary. It's a hair from shooting him in the head in Dallas or in Butler, Pennsylvania.
Right. Yeah.
You know?
Well, in the irony of the whole thing was Trump basically saying, "Hey, I just saw this video of Biden admitting to a quid pro quo. We might want to investigate that." And then they try to get Trump on. They impeach Trump for a quid pro quo. It was just so wild.
I know, and they just outright lied. They go, "Look, obviously Biden was threatening to fire the prosecutor, but we know a priori that Joe Biden is a saint.
Yeah.
So the only reason that he would do that is because the prosecutor is bad and not good. And Joe Biden wants him replaced by a good guy.
Yeah.
And by the way, this guy's 14 different investigations into Hunter Biden's company, they're all dormant. Right? Just like weird. You're just supposed to like be hypnotized and just go dormant. But Scott, they told me the investigations were dormant. Well, where's that come from? Like, what public relations firm said that we all have to use this one term for them? And then it turns out that's not true. Some of those investigations had been shut down, but some of them had not been shut down until the guy was fired and replaced. And then what the new guy do? Did Joe Biden insist that a new guy would come in and indict the company that his son was working for? And was he really mad? And did he threaten to withhold $1 billion when the new prosecutor didn't indict Burisma? No, he didn't say anything when the new guy shut down all investigations into the company. Give me a break, man. And again, dude, it's like with any of the crazy lies, with all the Russiagate lies and whatever, it's the most absurd thing that they demand you accept. That
Well,
Biden,
with
yeah,
that, if you take that Vindman quote, right, about we have a Ukraine-Russian policy, and the president went against the Ukraine-Russian policy of the last 30 years, and then you look at their defense of Biden, that he was acting within US policy. That's what their defense is,
yeah,
you know? And so it's like, oh, well, that's the whole game. As long as it fits the security state, and it
mhm.
fits within the scope of what the deep state wants to happen, then yeah, have at it. And their ultimate goal is to protect their own ass and enrich themselves.
Yeah.
And that
And then look where it's led.
includes
It's led to
right.
this catastrophic war, right? Because
Yeah.
they can't admit that any of this is their fault. They can't admit that, like, geez, go to remember the Victoria Nuland phone call where she's
Mm-hmm.
on the phone with Jeffrey Pyatt and they're talking about they want to push the current government out and replace it with this government. They want it to look like this and like that. And what are they saying there over and over again? We got to midwife this thing. We got to glue it. We got to seal it. We got to sail it. We got to make it stick. We got to get it to sail before Russia can torpedo it. Okay. Well, none of that worked, right? It all blew up immediately into a war. They lost Crimea. Civil war broke out in the Donbass. 10,000 people killed in the first year.
Mm-hmm.
But they can't ever, like even late at night, over whiskeys in the dark, say like, geez, this is kind of our fault, dude. Like maybe if we take into account the role that we played in getting this thing going, we could have a more appropriate kind of resolution and compromise and figure out a way. Nope.
No,
It's all I'm
they
FDR,
say the
you're
price
Hitler.
is worth it.
That's
Just
right.
like they said in Iraq, the price is
Yep.
worth it.
Yep. And no matter how bad you provoke your enemy, once you have one, you can never appease him. Otherwise, you're Neville Chamberlain. And on it goes.
Yeah.
You know?
Yep. So where are we at in the book, Scott?
Well, I got it down to 800 pages. I did have it down to 789 and then it went back up again. But I have resolved all the little notes to self in the text and in the footnotes.
Mm-hmm.
I knocked out all my tabs. I knocked out all the remaining bookmarks and chip clips in the books on my shelf here, although I got a few that are mocking me. But I'm out of space. I'm out of space. So those books can burn in hell.
Might call your wife and tell her to steal your books.
Yeah, seriously, clean this shit out of here.
Hide the books from him.
You should see. I got all this behind me. It's all 2 and 3 layers, and then you can't see over here to my right is 2 layers, top and bottom. This is out of control in here. But yeah. So I'm just nitpicking the thing. I'm working with Will Porter. We're doing, getting my prepositions right and my commas right and looking for parts of sentences to try to cut for space and for, redundancy and too long of blabbiness. So, So that's it. My hard deadline, I want very, very badly to have it ready to go by Halloween. I don't know if that's really possible or not, but I do think it's within the realm of possibility here. And then I think I probably need to wait till the election, and hopefully it'll be a clear-cut victory for one side or the other. And
Mm,
then I'll just pull the trigger then. And if I have to put out a new edition with a little bit different ending after the inauguration or something, maybe I'll do that. But
mm.
seems like there's no point in putting it out right before the election. When like the last chapter, I'll have to have a last little chapter about, well, so here we go with Trump again, or here we go with the Harris administration, and leave it there kind of thing. So
Yeah. To be
anyway, I don't know,
continued.
man. I hope people like it. It's I know it's way long, although it's got 6,000 footnotes, 5,900 something. So it's really only 500 and some pages of text.
Yeah.
It's got overkill on the footnotes because I like proving my case if I can. So, I don't know. I hope people like it, man.
I'm sure they will. Well, both your other books that I've read, Enough Already and Fool's Errand, are both excellent.
So
You
people who've
really,
read it already, say that they really like it. I gave Clint Russell a copy of it like 2 years ago when it was only 600 pages the first time. And he was really excited about it. I gave Dave Smith a copy of it recently, to prepare for a debate that he did. And, he is really excited about it because, yeah, I cleaned it up a lot. It's changed a lot in the last few years since the last time I gave him one.
mm,
I've been working on this thing forever now. Um, and Kim Robinson and a few others who've read it seem to be, pretty happy with it. So I think I am, I don't know.
well, that's the writer's curse. You'll go back in like 5 years and read it, and you'll be like, shit, and you'll start rewriting it. Yeah.
Yeah. I'll tell you what, God, I hope I don't give into this, but I do have a bit of an itch now. Like I kind of want to go back and do a director's cut of Enough Already, where I put in all the footnotes because just got in a hurry. I was in such a hurry. I just went for the briefer, no footnote version. But in a way, I kind of want to put all the footnotes in there. And then, man, I got so much on Bosnia and Chechnya and Bill Clinton's support for the terrorists now that I've got. I just do, I barely mentioned that
Mm,
in Enough Already. Like I think
hmm.
on one page, I'm like, Bill Clinton was supporting these terrorists the whole time they're bombing us all through the 90s, and now I got whole chapters on that shit. And it's,
Oh, wow.
yeah, so kind of want to go back and do like the director's cut of Enough Already because it really is. There's a lot of overlap. I mean, well, just like in Syria and wherever, we back our government backs the terrorists against the Russians and against the Shiites.
Mm.
And so,
Are you going to do the videos like you did with Enough Already for this one?
oh, I hadn't really thought of that. Yeah, I should do that with
Like
Gus.
a countdown. Like,
Yeah, and I thought too that because I have real problems with the IRS. Dude, I worked for years, for a decade or more. I worked for antiwar.com, making $1,500 a month,
mm,
and they pretend they're going back to 2007 on me, like the statute of limitations don't exist. They're trying to get, I can't say, but they're trying to get high tens of thousands of dollars out of me or worse that I just cannot do. I don't know what they're thinking. Blood from a turnip kind of deal.
yeah.
So, um, I may have to do the audiobook like a Substack serial podcast, in the Martyr Made fashion,
Hmm.
and just because it's going to take me forever to do the audiobook anyway. It's going to
Mm.
just be murder. God, I'm not looking forward to it. But if I can do that as a Substack podcast series and get people to subscribe, then maybe I'll make it worth my while to do it that way. Otherwise, I'll just try to get it knocked out as fast as I can.
Mm.
And but yeah, I don't know, man. I wonder what would have happened if Enough Already had come out in like 2006 when the terror war was really hot, or
Right.
or even like in 14 in the middle of Syria. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? Something like that. Um, this one looks like it's going to be coming out and the war's still going on.
Yeah.
So, you know, I hope that instead of being kind of a bookend on an era, the way Enough Already was, not that the terror wars are really over, but that's how it seems to people anyway. And the
Hmm.
whole first 20 years of the new century being over and all that. With this one, I think it'll probably get a lot more attention and be a lot more controversial because it's going to piss people off because it's about one of their current things. Um, and it's about how they're all wrong.
Yeah.
So, depending on how much attention it gets and whether, you know, hopefully I can pull a Daryl Cooper and get Tucker in trouble and get some eyeballs on the thing.
Yeah. I think there's going to be stocking stuffers this year.
Yeah, I know.
Big,
That's what I really
big
want.
old 800-page stocking stuffers.
I want to go on Tucker and be like, dude, forgive me. And then just look right into the camera and be like, ladies, this is what your man wants for Christmas this year. You know, I mean it, dude. That's the only time people really buy books is once a year for Christmas. You know what I mean? Like, I
Right.
gotta get in time for that.
Yeah.
So it's a race, man. And believe me, I'm doing nothing but work on this book. I'm just driving myself completely nuts.
Hmm.
Sleep 4 or 5 hours a day and just do nothing but look at the book the rest of the time. So, um, for people who are mad at me for taking so long, you know, I'm working on it. I'm
It'll
trying.
be worth it. It'll be worth it.
I think it'll be worth it. I hope it'll be worth it.
All right. Well, plug away. Tell people about the Institute.
Okay, yeah, I'm the director of the Libertarian Institute. Man, I got a bunch of great guys. We just brought on CJ Kilmer, the Dangerous History podcast. We're bringing on Doug Bandow from Cato.
Nice.
You know, reunited with his buddy Ted Galen Carpenter, the two best guys at Cato. And we're going to be sharing Doug with antiwar.com. Daniel Larison as well, formerly with the American Conservative Magazine and writes the great blog Eunomia. And we're going to be publishing him as well. And get this, man, Lyle Goldstein, formerly with the Naval War College, and who's a brilliant genius analyst on, you know, nuclear war and great power conflict with Russia and China. He's going to be joining our group here pretty soon. Looks like we're going to be publishing his book and hopefully
Nice.
making him a fellow as well. And then that's on top of just all that we've added in the last year. We got Tom Edlam and Joe Solis Mullen. We've got Daniel Sanchez and geez, who am I forgetting? Our new fellows. Geez, help me. I got a
Yeah.
picture in my mind, but it's too vague. I gotta pull it up now.
Kim and
Someone's gonna be mad at
Rachel
me.
and
All our new guys, man. We got a lot of new guys. Give me a sec here. Um,
I'm
and
trying to think of everybody I see in the chat. So
I just gotta click on this thing. Um, our new
John
guy,
Weeks.
Jeremy R. Hammond, of course,
Yeah.
who is the libertarian movement's foremost expert on the Israel-Palestine conflict. He wrote the book "Obstacle to Peace:
Mm.
America's Role in the Israel-Palestine Conflict," which is fantastic. And then Bill Bupert, who is Army veteran and expert on counterinsurgency warfare and why it's stupid and never works. Um, and then that's on top of course, you know, all our great regular staff, including James Bovard, Ted Carpenter, Richard Booth, who is our Oklahoma City bombing expert, our Glenn D. Wilburn fellow. We've got, and of course, you know, our young generation, Keith Knight, Kyle Anzalone, Hunter Durensis, Connor Freeman, Will Porter. So and books, man, we got 14 books. We're about to do 5 more. We got William Van Wagenen's book on Obama's dirty war in Syria. Believe me, it's the best book anybody ever wrote about that. I'm so jealous and angry that I didn't write it. Like it's just so good. So good. Keith Knight has 2 more coming out. Joe Mullen has another one coming out along with my own. So we'll be up at 19 books here, published by the Institute by the end of the year, very soon, near there. Yeah, we're just killing, man. We got tons of great writers, tons of great podcasters, tons of great books, and that's all at libertarianinstitute.org. I got a show at scotthorton.org, 6,000 interviews going back, and we keep all the bad news at antiwar.com. And I'm on the radio in LA on Thursday afternoons on KPFK, and read my book Enough Already. It's about why everything in the world is all Jimmy Carter's fault.
All right, man. Well, I'm going to stop the recording, Scott. I appreciate all this.
Oh yeah, man. Thank you.